Hello, and thanks for joining us for our first attempt at a digital presentation. This is supposed to be a presentation that we had for the neighborhood, in your neighborhood, but unfortunately, we're here in empty City Council chambers. My name is Megan Duval. I'm the Historic Preservation Officer for the City of Spokane, and with me is Logan Camporeale. He is the Historic Preservation Specialist for the city, and he's actually working on the district nomination and all the other forms that go with that. So Logan and I will be sort of tag teaming this presentation today, and this is our attempt at starting public outreach with the neighborhood. So I think it's important that we talk about the elephant in the room. So is this really an important thing that we want to keep doing while we're in the middle of a global pandemic and we can't actually be with each other right now? Why is this important? And I think that the thing that we have to realize is that historic preservation, in this time when we're at home constantly, maybe this is the one time that we can realize how important our neighborhoods are, and that they really are part of our community and our identity, and our neighborhoods really do create a sense of place that historic preservation, through the creation of a historic district, can actually help with protecting this sense of place that maybe we've all connected to a little bit more than we normally do. So the background of the Cannon Historic District, there are already a couple of National Register historic districts in your neighborhood. The first one is the 9th Avenue National Register Historic District, and that you'll see on the map that actually has some pretty large boundaries that go beyond 9th Avenue itself. It was prepared in 1994, and it has what we call 198 contributing buildings, and that just means that those are the historic buildings, and 22 buildings that are non-contributing. Maybe they were built outside of the period of significance, past 1940. You can see the period of significance is 1892 to 1940. And that just means that the district importance starts in 1892 when the first building was built. And then it ends in 1940 when there was a reason for the ending. Maybe it was the development really stopped in that district at that point. So 22 non-contributing buildings, they could be outside of the period of significance, or they could be so changed from their original appearance that they no longer contribute. Also within the district area is the Mary Cliff Park District, and that's actually, it's within your neighborhood in the Cliff Cannon District, but it's actually right outside of the district boundaries that we're looking at for the local historic district. That district was actually prepared in 1978, and it has 100 contributing buildings and 20 non-contributing buildings, and that period of significance is similar, 1889 to 1940. So the neighborhood also includes 2 local historic districts, and those districts are, the first one is the Comstock-Shadle District. Both of these districts only include 4 properties. So this one has 4 homes along 9th Avenue, and it's between Madison and Jefferson. And they're all associated with the same families, the Comstock family and the Shadle family. The other local historic district is the Boogs Addition Historic District, and that also, as I mentioned, includes 4 homes, and they're right around the corner of Adams and 12th Avenue. This just kind of gives you an overview of the neighborhood, and the green stars actually represent individually listed properties within the district, and then the big pink blobs basically are the 2 National Register districts, and then you'll see the 2 local register districts also include the green stars.
Everyone, this is Logan. Megan introduced me, but just saying hello. How's everybody doing? I'm going to talk a little bit about why we chose the boundary the way that we did. And it's a challenging thing to draw a historic district boundary. There's a number of careful considerations that must be weighed in order to come up with the best possible boundary. We also have some limitations in our office, and I'll just kind of run through some of those things. As you saw, can you click back, Megan? As you saw, all the green stars are all individually listed properties, and so we did our best to include as many of those individually listed properties as possible. We got the big chunk near Boogs Edition, but also the ones that are over to the far east off of Lincoln Place and Lincoln Street, and also some on the far north side of the district on 6th and 7th Avenues. And so we, again, tried to sort of draw a boundary that would encompass as many of those as possible, while also encompassing as much of the National Register historic districts as we could. As Megan mentioned, there's also the Mary Cliff Historic District, and that's just a distinctly different area, a much larger scale of the properties and the houses, and so it sort of makes sense as a different historic district, and it has its own challenges, but they're different than the area that we're focusing on here. In the future, the borders of the boundary, you might be saying, why did you draw the boundary on the west side where you did, or why did you draw the boundary on the south side where you did? And, again, that was challenging. Part of it was that we had to think about how many resources our office could manage. And we decided that really we couldn't have more than 500 properties in the first phase of this historic district. But should the neighborhood be interested in expanding the district in the future, it does make some sense to expand it to the west or even slightly to the south down to 17th or something like that. Those areas fit within the scope of the nomination that we're preparing, and they also maintain that similar district feel. Like I mentioned, further to the east is a much different neighborhood feel in the Cliff Park area, and then to the north of the district boundary, there just wasn't sufficient intact historic resources to justify including them within the proposed district boundary. So some main differences between a National Register district and a local register district. We mentioned that there's some of both of those currently already exist within the proposed district boundary. Both the 9th Avenue Historic District is a National Register Historic District, and the Boogs Edition, for example, is a local register historic district. A National Register District is processed by the federal government, the National Park Service, whereas a local district actually goes through a local government process through the Spokane Historic Preservation Office. The office staffs a commission made up of peers from the city and county that help make decisions on what belongs on Spokane's Register of Historic Places. So in order to create a local historic district, we need to go through that process. The criteria is generally less stringent or different than that of the National Register. It doesn't need to have a national significance, but really is focused on a local significance, a significance to Spokane. And a simple majority of property owners need to agree to listing the district for it to be created. This is specific in the Spokane Municipal Code that allows for this process. And the owner consent is achieved through a balloting process whereby ballots are sent to property owners and they're given an opportunity to voice their opinion on how they think whether or not the district should be formed. The protection of the historic character is achieved through a design review process that's administrative through our office for smaller things, but that relies on the Historic Preservation Commission to make big decisions. For example, if a demolition is proposed of a historic structure, all those decisions will go through through the Preservation Commission, and there'll be a public meeting where property owners and district residents have the opportunity to come down and voice their opinion, or hopefully in the future come down and voice their opinion, if not voice their feelings digitally. I'm going to turn it back over to Megan.
So what does it mean to have a National Register Historic District? I think a lot of people understand it maybe incorrectly or have a myth about there being some sort of very stringent process for when changes are done to homes or buildings within a National Register Historic District. And the reality is that the National Register of Historic Places really is an honorary designation. The only protection of a National Register district in Spokane, this is something extra that Spokane did, this is not a national thing, is that we do review demolition within the boundaries of a National Register Historic District. In the past, before 2018, when we had an ordinance revision under Councilmember Lori Kinnear's direction, we were able to review demolitions in National Register districts, but as long as there was a replacement structure, we had to sign off on the demolition. And we also didn't have design review over the replacement structure that took its place. So something that happened as a result of that in your neighborhood that you might be able to relate to is the fact that there were 3 homes on 9th Avenue near Huckleberry's. It was actually on the very eastern edge of the 9th Avenue Historic District. Those 3 homes were contributing or historic properties within the district. So we did get a chance to review the demolition, but as soon as there was a replacement structure that was proposed for those homes, we had to sign off. So the change in the new Historic Preservation Ordinance, or the revision of the Historic Preservation Ordinance, is that now within National Register districts, the Landmarks Commission can review the new, the design of the new construction in its place. So we do have that. But the other thing to know about National Register, about the fact that why are we moving forward with a local district, is because this neighborhood includes several different areas of zoning. So we have, 150 feet of office commercial on the northern side of the district near 6th Avenue, to multifamily, to single family. So there's lots of different types of new construction that could actually happen within this proposed district. And the local district will help us get our arms around that kind of growth. So why did the neighborhood council really get involved and ask us to consider creating a local historic district? So really, some of the biggest things were to give more protection to our neighborhood or your neighborhood's historic resources through the design review of existing properties, so changes to the exteriors of properties, and the review of new construction. But some of the benefits are that we can offer incentives to those historic or contributing properties within the district. We'll talk more about those in a little bit later in the presentation. We can strengthen the review of demolitions within the district, and for really important properties, the Landmarks Commission can actually deny demolition of really important properties within your district. And we can maintain the historic nature of the district as well as a sense of place of the district. So the basics of a local historic district. So you have to have paperwork. So the paperwork is what Logan is working on right now. So that includes the Spokane Register nomination document, and that's going to include basically description of the architectural styles that occur within your neighborhood. It also talks about that period of significance, and Logan's going to talk a little bit more about that. It talks about the boundary. It includes the boundary and maps. A discussion of whether something is contributing or non-contributing within the district. It also gives a historic context of the neighborhood and a statement of significance. Also within that document are resource forms. So every building within the district boundary is going to have a form. It might be 2 on each form, but it will have a picture of each building. It will talk about the year that it was built, the architectural style, the integrity of that building, and whether or not it's contributing or non-contributing. And then finally, the third piece is design standards and guidelines. And these are basically a book of guidelines and standards that will help when you're preparing a construction project, when you are thinking about new construction within the district. It will include how to apply for what we call a certificate of appropriateness when you're getting a building permit. All of those things are located within the design standards. So a little bit more about design review. What does that mean? What are you going to be looking at? Are you regulating everything I do? If I'm going to change my kitchen, do I get regulated? The answer is no. We only will be looking at the exterior changes that are proposed for properties. So we do look at changes that require a building permit for every property within the boundaries of the district. So somebody might say, well, my house was built in 1975. Why would I need to come in and have you look at my property? And the reason is because, now it sounds like a terrible word, but those are considered intrusions into the district. They're non-contributing. They're not part of the historic fabric. But we look at those changes really on an administrative basis in the office rather than having that go before the whole Landmarks Commission, just to make sure that what's being proposed is in keeping with the district. It's not going to be more of an intrusion into the district. But we also will be looking at new construction within the district, and we're going to be looking at things like design, materials, massing, all of those things just to make sure that it's compatible with the district as it exists today. So those are some things that we're going to be looking at. The process should be fairly quick. It's mostly the street-facing facades of the buildings that we're looking at, and we have an online application process so that you don't even have to come into the city for most of those applications. We will let you know if the work that you're proposing needs to go before the whole Landmarks Commission. And I'm going to turn it over to Logan to talk more about the actual nomination documents.
All right, so just going to talk a little bit about the history of the neighborhood, which we'll get an opportunity to dig more into, but just going to give a little overview. Megan has mentioned a period of significance for the neighborhood, and that period of significance starts in 1883, and that's because that's when the district was first platted. The district is named after Anthony M. Cannon, who is one of the early white folks who arrives in Spokane and starts sort of creating a little bit of a business empire here. He got a large piece of land from Frank Glover and was able to develop that into a residential district. Cannon District, which was platted in 1883, stretches all the way into what we think of as Brown's Addition, just on the south side of Coeur d'Alene Park. But it really stretches far up onto the hill, all along the bluff overlooking Hangman Creek, but also well onto the east side of Monroe. Oh no, east of Maple. My fault. There's actually 8 different editions up there on top of Cannon's Addition, including Boog's Addition, the Hill Addition, Hillside, South Park Addition. There's a number of these different residential developments that were planned by different developers. Cannon's Addition did develop on the north side near Brown's Addition, but it took a lot longer for Cannon's Addition to start developing on the south side, mostly because there was a large topographic barrier, the hill. People didn't have cars yet, so they were restricted to either walking or using a horse or something like this to get up the hill. In 1890, the company tried to overcome that challenge with the Monroe cable car line. You can actually see a little picture of the cable car there. That was the first attempt to get some more residential development happening. It went straight up Monroe, which you might be thinking that doesn't sound very smart. It's pretty steep up Monroe. And that proved to be a challenge that had lots of technical problems, and the cable car line folded in 1894. It did spur some growth. The first house was built in 1888 in the neighborhood, but only 18 homes were constructed between 1888 and 1899. So not a lot. It was very sparse development. You can see a picture of a little home there that says 11th and Walnut, I believe, on the description of this home. It doesn't give a date, but you can imagine definitely a different feel up there at this time. For comparison, like I said, only 18 homes in the district come 1899, and nearby Browns Addition, which didn't have the same topographic challenge, there were already 92 constructions at its in 1899 was the big game changer. The Cannon Hill Car Line began operation, and it took a different route up the hill. They used the road Bishop Court to sort of make a cut and use the least steep route up the hill, and then went right up Adams right through the proposed district. Residential development was spurred all along that streetcar line. Many of the homes, even on the north to south streets, faced the streetcar line, whereas most of the homes in the neighborhood faced north and south. All around the streetcar line, development was really focused on that, providing easy access to work and downtown. 220 homes were built in the district from 1899 through 1909. So you can see that that really kicked off a period of rapid development in the district. I'll also mention that because of the Cannon Hill Car Line and as a nod to Anthony Cannon for the first plat, we chose the name Cannon Historic District. It also sort of is a nod to the part of the neighborhood named Cliff Cannon, and we felt like that was encompassed really what we were looking for in a name for the district. As I mentioned, the cable car line, but then also the Cannon Hill Car Line, which was an electric streetcar, I should have mentioned. And Spokane was lucky to have early access to electric streetcars, mostly because we had easy access to hydroelectric power with the Spokane River providing that power through Avista or Washington Water Power at that time. This map here shows a crisscross of all of the different streetcar lines that went up and down Cannon Hill. The yellow line going up Monroe there is the early cable car line, and the dark green line is the Cannon Hill Car Line. You'll see a bunch of different spurs shooting off different directions. Those are different companies that also tried to capitalize on that new residential development and then built off different spur lines to encourage additional development in those areas. Oftentimes, the folks who owned the residential plats that they were trying to sell also had ownership stakes in the streetcar lines, and so it could be sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy to get these neighborhoods built out by providing public transportation. The Cannon Hill Car Line ran from 1899 until 1931. At which time it stopped running. I should jump back real quick. I have a little newspaper clipping here that says, lawyers will stop walking. And that ran in 1899 or maybe late 1898 when the Cannon Hill Car Line was announced. So there were still people living on the hill at that time, 18 houses remaining. But they were limited to walking, and obviously that had discouraged some folks from choosing to live up there. Like I said, the car line runs until 1931, which encompasses the neighborhood's primary period of growth. But after 1931, the streetcar companies replaced all of the streetcar lines with buses. And you can see a picture here of actually the Cannon Hill bus line, which the neighborhood really advocated to have a dedicated bus line that very much tracked the same lines as the streetcar line. They didn't want to be treated differently since the streetcar was removed. And it seems that these buses really did, in a lot of ways, at least take over for the public transportation needs of the neighborhood, allowing for working class folks who didn't yet own cars to live in the Cannon Historic District. We also do see the introduction of a lot of car facilities at this time, both garages. The streets that are further south in the neighborhood that developed a little bit later tend to have more alleys. And so you see some of these car-dominated or car accommodations that start to come into the neighborhood during that later period from 1931 to 1955. You'll also notice that the boundary covers a large part of all of the streetcar lines that went through the neighborhood at the time. Again, sort of telling to that story of public transportation in the neighborhood. A little bit about the period of significance. This is another challenging part of preparing the district nomination, much like drawing the boundary, you're weighing a bunch of different considerations and trying to figure that out. And this here is a graph that shows, and I should mention, we will make this presentation available in PDF form so that if you need to zoom in on the graphs or the maps, you'll be able to do that from our website as well. So this graph here shows, it's a bar graph that shows constructions per decade throughout the history of the neighborhood. You'll see just a couple constructions from 1880 to 1889, 21 constructions in the next decade, and then the most rapid development for the whole neighborhood happened between 1900 and 1909, when 216 buildings were constructed that still exist today. I should mention that all of these numbers are for buildings that still exist today, it doesn't include ones that have been demolished. The challenge is, where do we draw the end of the line? It's pretty easy to figure out where to draw the beginning, 1883 when the neighborhood's platted, but how do we figure out where to draw the end? You can see the development has a significant drop-off starting in 1960, the decade of 1960. And you can also see that from 1950 to 59, there was sort of a resurgence of development in the neighborhood, really in 1940 to 49 as well. And we attribute this increase in residential development mostly to pre-war housing efforts and then a post-war building boom. And some really interesting additional architecture is built during this time period. The introduction of the Tudor composite style to the neighborhood, some smaller scale buildings, lots of duplexes and triplexes that are all really interesting, mostly still constructed from the traditional materials in the neighborhood. And so we see that sort of post-war building boom die off in 1955, and so we decided to draw the end of the period of significance there at the end of 1955. You'll see that of the 478 total resources or buildings that are in the district, 432 of those were built before 1955. So the vast, vast majority, which means that most of the properties, at least based on period of significance, could potentially be contributing if they haven't been changed so much. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we're just going to go through some of the top benefits of a local historic district. The number one I've got to handle here is a local historic district protects the investment of owners and residents of properties. As Megan talked about, there's some design review that you need to go through if you're going to make changes to your property. And sometimes that might seem like, I got to go through this additional process on top of permitting. But it ensures that the neighborhood that you decided to buy in retains the character that it had when you decided to buy there. And it also ensures that your neighbor has to go through that same process if they propose a change to the outside of their house. So it's sort of a little bit of mutual agreement between neighbors that we're going to maintain the historic character of this neighborhood that, as Megan was talking about, might have some additional meaning to us right now as we're all stuck in our homes, or at least near our homes, spending time walking around what is a really walkable neighborhood that has visual variety, both in the tree canopy, but also really in the historic buildings that exist there. I should mention here, there's also some actual financial benefits that say that, actually Megan tells me she's going to get at that one as well. Number two, properties within local districts, here we go, appreciate at rates greater than local market value, as well as faster, similar, non-designated neighborhoods. So this is really just speaking to the value of your home, and that oftentimes in historic districts, the value of homes is higher than in comparable neighborhoods that are not designated as historic districts. Again, I think that speaks to the idea that a buyer has some assurance that they'll have a say in the future of that neighborhood, and that it's going to maintain the character that they found appealing when they chose to buy there. Also, as we might be thinking about potential economic downturns, there's some evidence to suggest in studies that properties in historic districts tend to be less vulnerable to market volatility. If the real estate market has a large fluctuation due to external factors, sometimes historic districts can sort of be like a little bit of a heat sink to prevent a lot of that value from coming out of the properties. Number 3 I've got here is a local district provides social and psychological benefits that really talks about people being able to enjoy their environment, not just the natural environment, but the built environment that they live around. To have an attractive place, a place with variety to go on a walk each night, to have a tree canopy that provides shade even in the middle of summer. Something I wanted to mention about the tree canopy, I was looking into how many street trees are there in the Cannon Historic District, and trees that are either in the public right-of-way or that that hang over the public right-of-way. There are 1,500 of those trees, which seems like a lot. About 30% of them are Norway maples, but there's a lot of ponderosa pines, sycamores, London plane trees. And then there's another 30% of the total trees that are just varieties that make up less than 1% of the total. So it is really this visual variety that's not just generated through the environment, like the trees, but also through the buildings. On the screen here, we have a Tudor composite style, like I was mentioning. These were built in the 40s, but some smaller style cottages, but still very interesting. Not just a vernacular style, but something that has visual appeal from the curb. A total change down below there is a Queen Anne style. This was the style that was most popular in the early part of the district and tends to be in the northern part of the district. And a much more grand feeling. But it wouldn't be a surprise to see these two houses just 3 blocks from each other in the Cannon Historic District. And that really provides some great variety that neighbors enjoy. I'm going to turn it back over to Megan here.
So I think one of the things that preservationists have tried to really do is talk about how preservation is actually a very environmentally friendly thing to do. And local historic districts really can help the environment. They really encourage reuse of historic buildings, retain existing resources like streets and infrastructure and all of those things that have existed for decades in the Cannon Historic District. That this is something with established neighborhoods that we're actually helping the environment in a lot of ways. So by having a walkable neighborhood where you can get to a grocery store, you don't have to get in your car every time. And by not demolishing historic structures, we're eliminating some of that landfill waste that can happen. And the last one that we threw out here in the top 5 benefits is that a local historic district really can give a community a voice in their future. And what does this mean? Like, what do you mean I have a voice? It means that by having this district created, when any sort of review comes in front of the Landmarks Commission, so big changes to the district, demolitions, new constructions, major changes to historic structures within the district, it means that we actually will have a public meeting where neighbors can come and give their opinion and talk about what they would like to see in their neighborhood. Ultimately, it's the Landmarks Commission who makes the decision about design and things like that, but neighbors can actually have part of that conversation, where now when you're just going in and getting a building permit, nobody's asking the neighborhood what they think. And this is a chance for the neighborhood to have some more involvement. So I think the biggest benefit is the fact that there is some financial, basically some financial incentives that can happen in a historic district. So all local historic districts, the contributing structures, so those historic structures that are within the district are eligible for what's called the Special Tax Valuation 10-year Property Tax Reduction Program if you invest in your property. So what does that look like? Let me just walk through a quick example. So in order to qualify, you have to spend 25% of the assessed value of the building. And that is not the land value, it's just the building's value. So let's say this particular home is actually in the Rockwood neighborhood, but that's okay. So we'll say that the building value on this one is $500,000. So in order to be able to use the special tax valuation, you have to spend 25%. That would be $125,000 on this one. So the actual amount in this example that somebody spent was $400,000. They redid the roof, they redid bathrooms, they put in a new kitchen, they refinished floors, they painted, they did some foundation work, they had to put in a new HVAC system. All of those things would all be qualified expenses. So the building is reassessed on its normal schedule, so this is not a tax freeze. It's something that is a reduction of the amount invested in the historic property. So that $400,000 that the property owner spent in a 2-year period, so it's a 24-month period that you have to spend the 25%, gets removed from the valuation, and that's the total valuation. That's both the land and the building value. So the amount you're taxed on, your property taxes, is $125,000. Kind of an easy way to think of it is for every $100,000 invested, it's about $1,100 to $1,200 that you save in property taxes. Each year, yes, each year for 10 years.
I'll just point out one more thing about this. Megan does the best at explaining special tax valuation, but I'll just point out that lots of property owners nominate their homes because they care about the protecting the historic character of their homes. But a lot of property owners apply for or nominate their home so specifically so they can take advantage of the tax incentive. And they often pay a consultant a substantial amount of money in order to do that. And I think it's fair to point out, or important to point out, that in this case, we were able to get some federal grant money in order to do this project. And so if the district is successfully created, all contributing properties will be eligible for this tax valuation without having to pay a consultant or go through that process individually. Instead, the collective group will go through it, and everybody will be able to take advantage of it. And I think that's a really cool part about the, one more thing. Oh yes, one more thing also. We also have one more incentive called the Facade Improvement Grant, and we're in our second year of granting that out. And it is grants up to $5,000, and they're matching monies, and it needs to be a project on the street-facing facade of a listed building or a contributing building to a local historic district. So, for example, if you were going to repaint the front of your house, or if you were going to do a porch renovation project to try to get the old wood back on your porch, or something like that, you would be able to apply for this once a year. And the commission will make a decision on which applications are chosen, the Historic Preservation Commission and Historic Landmarks Commission. And those grants will go out, like I said, as matching monies, and a money that you get after you complete the project and we verify that it was completed. So that's another cool incentive that we have. Last year we had a grant for the Garland Theater. And so they needed some waterproofing done and some terracotta repairs on the front of their building, and they were able to take advantage of that grant, so that was exciting. All right, so process for the creation of the district. As Megan mentioned earlier, one of the keys to being able to create the district is that we need to have, or maybe I mentioned, is that we need to have a simple majority of property owners be in agreement to create the district, or in this case, we'll just say vote in favor of creating the district. The way that we did this in Brown's Edition, and that we're going to do this again in Cannon Historic District, is we'll prepare mailable ballots. There'll basically be a sheet of paper that will include the parcel numbers that each property owner owns, and will be sent out to all the property owners in the district. All property owners of a developable parcel will get a vote. You might be thinking, what does a developable parcel mean? It really means any parcel that already has a building on it, or one that could have a building on it. So in the case that there's a small little teeny triangle parcel in front of your house or behind your house, that isn't something that would get a vote. But there are about 590, I'm pretty confident on that number, developable parcels in the neighborhood that are owned by approximately 484 property owners. And the reason those numbers are different is because a substantial number of property owners own more than one property. For comparison, just to give you an idea of how much bigger this project is than Brown's Addition, in Brown's Addition we had 371 developable parcels and 274 property owners, so about 200 more of both in this case. So it is a heavy lift, and also part of the reasoning why we had to limit the size of the boundary. And we probably ended up bigger than we even should have, but we, again, had to make the decision that made the most sense for creating a cohesive district that fit with the story. When we send out the ballots, there'll be a 60-day period for ballots to be returned. And we'll hope to have at least an envelope in there. If we're lucky, it'll be our self-addressed envelope. If we're lucky, it'll be stamped as well, so you don't have to pay for a stamp to get it back. And if times are different, you'll also just be able to bring it down to City Hall and drop it off. We'll see how that goes. And we'll also maybe talk about an extension to this 60-day period, something that's honestly just coming to my mind right now. But with the current situation, it might be reasonable and something we might want to talk to legal staff about if there's any way we can extend this due to our circumstances. 50% plus one of those ballots will need to come back with yes votes. That means that we sort of start with 590 no votes, and we have to get to half of that, half of that being yes votes in order to create the district. Every ballot that is not returned is essentially counted as a no vote, because it's not 50% plus one of the ballots that are returned, but rather 50% plus one of the total developable parcels within the district. So that's an important distinction to remember. And that'll be sort of, once we get rolling on the voting process, we'll know what the number of yes votes we need to have. And we'll do some reporting of that on a weekly basis or something like that of how many votes we've received back. So the neighborhood has some idea of where we are. This is just a little run through our timeline, which has been disrupted and rearranged in many ways. And may again be rearranged, but just to give you an idea of where we're at and where we're headed. We attended the neighborhood council meeting on February 4th to give just sort of a really introductory presentation that this one is following up on. And today we're filming this district workshop for you. Both Megan and I have primarily been working from home, so that's been getting adjusted to. And we're going to be continuing to work on some things like ensuring that the SEPA and commerce requirements are met. I know you might be thinking, SEPA, why do you need to do a SEPA? Well, that's just what the rules call for. We have to go through that process, and also through a plan commission process. Plan commission's sort of been on hold, so as soon as they start figuring out how they're going to hold meetings, we'll get back on their agenda and move forward with that. We're hoping to host a district workshop in May that's in person. We're being optimistic that that might be possible, but if not, we will do another filmed or digital workshop like this one. We're going to do a survey about the design standards and guidelines. As Megan mentioned, that these things can have some customization based on what the neighborhood wants to see. The National Park Service gives us a set of standards, but there's some other guidelines that we do have some flexibility with and that the neighborhood will need to weigh in on. And so we'll figure out how we're going to do that outreach process. We're hoping to have another district workshop in June or July, again, hopefully in person. And then in August, we will present the documents, the nomination, the resource forms, and the district standards and guidelines to the Spokane Landmarks Commission. The Landmarks Commission will need to sort of approve it, as will the Plan Commission will make a recommendation. And once that is done, that's when we would send out ballots. And so we're imagining that would be sometime in mid to late August. And also part of the requirement in the Spokane Municipal Code requires us to post some large signs that say the process that we're going through. And so I don't know exactly where those will go, but there will be at least 2 signs posted in the neighborhood to get people's attention so that they can find out more about the process if they hadn't gotten outreached to at some previous point. Once the voting period is over, we will report back to the Landmarks Commission on how that went, and then they'll make a final recommendation based on whether or not the neighborhood gave property owner approval. And then we'll attend a neighborhood council meeting to give an update to the neighborhood council, and may attend other ones throughout if they start happening again, in order to provide an update on where we're at, and particularly with voting. And then the final action is for Spokane City Council to make a final move, which they do have final say, and so they could make a different decision. But I imagine if the neighborhood shows their support, they'll be highly encouraged to move forward with the district. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Megan.
So what are the next steps? So as Logan mentioned, and I've mentioned, Logan is currently working on those nomination documents. You might see him in the neighborhood. Now you've seen his face. You might see him taking photos at a socially distant level and out there by himself. So feel free, if you want to, come up and talk to him. And a lot of people have been. So that's been kind of an interesting lemonade out of lemon sort of situation where usually we don't have that much face-to-face interaction with neighborhoods. So that's good. You're getting the information directly from Logan. So if you see him, say hi. He's not doing anything suspicious, just taking pictures. I'm working on the design standards and guidelines document right now. And so all of these documents, when they get to a complete or a draft stage, we will put them up on our website. And the website is on this page as well. But that is where you'll be able to go, take a look, review those documents, give us any feedback. That will be open to you for several weeks for your comments and feedback. And as Logan mentioned in our timeline, we'll continue to try to find innovative ways for the neighborhood to engage with us in this process. This is really complicated. It's something that we really need to have outreach. We really need the neighborhood to be engaged in. It's difficult to get people to return ballots at the best of times. So we're going to need you to talk to your neighbors if you can. But we will continue to film future workshops if we need to. So we will always be updating our webpage, www.historicspokane.org/canon. We'll put this presentation will go on there, both the filmed presentation as well as just a PDF of the presentation itself. We're also going to be tapping into your neighborhood's social media through Nextdoor and your neighborhood council's Facebook page so that we can push information out to you. If we are able to have in-person workshops sometime this summer, that would be wonderful. We will try to engage you as much as possible through those sources. And then finally, something that Logan and I were talking about is if you'd like to have some sort of a digital discussion, if it's a Zoom meeting or a Facebook Live or something like that with questions and answers about the district creation, we would encourage you, and we have our email addresses here, to engage with us that way. So we have an email address and we can send out a doodle poll where we can find the best time that might work for the neighborhood. Here. Basically, I think this is sort of the reality for right now, but we hope that you will engage with us. Feel free to send any questions that you have to this email address.
Yeah, could you click back one slide real quick? Did I want to say something else here? Yeah, I guess just like Megan said, send us an email directly if you want to take part in sort of a Q&A session about the district. Oh, one more thing I wanted to say. It was sort of inopportune timing that we sent out that direct mailing. I've had an opportunity to talk to some of you as I've been taking photos in the district, but I just wanted to address that. We didn't know what was headed with the COVID-19 situation when we sent out that mailing. And unfortunately, in a perfect world where funding wasn't an issue, we would have sent out another paper mailing to explain to you the change in situation. And so we apologize. We just don't have it was hard enough to afford to send out that first mailing. And so we apologize that we're not able to send out another mailing like that. But do know that most of the things in that mailing are accurate, except that our workshop schedule has been rearranged to accommodate this change. So that was the only other thing that I had. And if you want to have, like Megan said, have a little Q&A session where we can talk about any of the things from this, send us an email and we'll figure out a doodle poll and we'll send it to all of the email lists we have for the neighborhood.
Yeah, that was something I was going to say, Logan, is that, we don't have everybody's email address in the neighborhood, so it's important for you to contact us with your email if you'd like to be more directly contacted. We do have a little neighborhood team that we got together, so we probably have 15 to 25, somewhere in there, email addresses, but we don't have everybody's. And so if you want to feel more connected and be one of our neighborhood ambassadors, I would almost say, so that when we do have information and we can send it out at least to that neighborhood email group that we do have, maybe then you can talk to your direct neighbors and get that information out. So please do send us an email at our email address. That's kind of our basic email address. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, and we are continuing to work and move forward with this.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.